Hello and welcome back to WJ Live, powered by The Western Journal. I'm George Upper, editor-in-chief of The Western Journal. I'm joined today by crack reporter, our other crack reporter, Michael Austin. Last time I was here, we had crack reporter AJ Shasha. Andrew is a terrible name for a crack reporter.
He's also not a crack reporter.
AJ now. Yeah. Cracker Jack, I think is what I called him, actually. Yeah. Cracker Jack reporter, AJ Shasha. And of course, our as always, our associate story editor, right?
Yes.
Deborah Van I get Van Helsing, and I'm just going to call you Van Helsing because that's what I get in my head.
Okay,
that's what we call you around there anyway, Deborah Van Helsing. And we got stuff to talk about. We got good stuff to talk about. Before we get to that, let me ask you to do us a favor. We are very much aware that every day we have viewers on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/WJLive, where those people are viewing the show but are not subscribed. And we see that day after day after day. That I can't describe to you how important it is to us that you subscribe to our podcast channel on YouTube. It really helps us out. If you will go there, click that subscribe button, and then click the bell next to it so you get notified when new episodes come on or when we have something important to share with you. Sometimes we'll pull a clip of part of an episode that we think is just really important to be shared, and makes it easier for you to maybe share it with other people that you think would be interested in it. We do that regularly, so we want to get that information into your hands. Our whole goal here is to equip viewers with the truth. And so we want to do that for you. We want you to help us do that for you by subscribing to our YouTube channel. But also to subscribe if perhaps you're listening to us on a audio podcast. We're on Apple, we're on Google, we're on Spotify, iHeart, of course, all of these, pretty much wherever you get your podcasts, we're going to be there. So if you listen to us by just audio as well, because you don't want to look at us, I think you have an issue that we should probably talk about if that's the case. But if it is the case, subscribe to us there as well. It really just helps us know how we're doing, how you are reacting to what we're doing. Leave us a comment on wherever you are finding us, and let us know how we're doing in meeting our goal of equipping you with the truth. That is, it's really the only reason we come in here and do this. So help us to know that. All right, so we are a couple of weeks now into a little over a week into the new Biden administration.
Yeah.
We have seen the man who previously called executive orders dictatorial issue a record number in his first week or so in office. Yeah. And which, I'm certainly not surprised by that. I don't know that anybody else really was or has been or has any right to be. But that's what we've seen. And essentially no action legislatively, which, again, not terribly surprising. Mm-hmm. We have seen for years Congress essentially relegating its role to the executive branch anyway. I mean, how much significant legislation has come out of Congress in the past 8 years? We had criminal reform or prison reform, I should say, under Donald Trump was a significant piece of legislation. Mm-hmm. Before that, Obamacare. And I can't think of anything super significant, budget bills, et cetera, other than that. And that's been 10 years. It's pretty much an executive order government now. Shouldn't be, but that's largely what we have, unfortunately. One of the reasons that's a bad idea, if you believe in the efficacy of these executive orders, if you like executive orders or you like federal power, federal authority, and I'm not a big fan of it, but if you are, executive orders are a bad way to get it done because there are so many ways to challenge them. And we're seeing that in a couple of states here, which gives me hope, actually. Michael, you wrote about this yesterday, I think. And specifically using two examples, one from Montana and one from Texas. In Montana, just as quick summaries here, the Save Women's Sports Act was designed very specifically to go against one of Joe Biden's executive orders regarding gender identity discrimination. And as Michael pointed out in the piece, it's really difficult to fight for women's rights and for the idea that there's no such thing as women, which is really what the Democrats are doing.
Yes.
They want both of those things. It's a tough position to be in. It almost makes me feel sorry for them. Almost. Texas has a lawsuit against another executive order that Joe Biden issued, which was intended to suspend deportations for, I think, 100 days. Yeah. I think it was for 100 days. And Texas just said we're not going to do that, and filed suit and actually got a restraining order issued against, restraining order is not the right word there, got a stay issued against the implementation of that executive order. I actually prefer to say Joe Biden has a restraining order against him, though. That just feels better to me. So I think I might just,
right.
I might just. He shouldn't he have a restraining order? I feel like creepy Joe Biden should have multiple restraining orders filed against him. So we might just use that language. Your story yesterday, Michael, when I read that, I just found it to be one of the more optimistic pieces I've read in a while. It, not only because it encourages me to see these states take action against a grossly overreaching federal government, which is how I would have described the federal government in the 80s. So you can only imagine how I feel about it now. But there's that. That's encouraging. But the other thing that was encouraging was just sort of your conclusion of the piece, which was that this actually is how the republic was set up to run. We have things in place to keep the federal government, at least on paper, in theory, to keep the federal government from getting its hands into every moment of every aspect of every one of our lives. And so it's just been relatively rare recently that I've read a piece and kind of smiled at the end of it, and your piece had me do that. It seems like I'd be smiling all the time, I know, but it's
I'd like to think all of my pieces make people smile.
Well,
if I'm being honest with myself.
I'm sure your dad is smiling at many of them, mostly because at the bottom of the piece, there's a little picture of you. I'm sure he smiles at that.
And my mom, a few other people.
Maybe.
All right.
I was thinking your dad, but maybe your mom too. So question for you guys. And really, I guess two questions, and I'll kind of throw them both out there because they are sort of related in a way. And the first is, how did we get here? Looking back, why do you think states have sat back for so long and just let the federal government run rampant over their sovereignty? States are supposed to be sovereign under the Constitution. And the federal government has just, steamrollered over that. Why do you think states have been okay with that, or state legislatures maybe would be more specific? And then the other sort of reverse of that question is, where does it go from here? Do you think this is the beginning of a longer trend, a larger trend? And if so, what might our republic look like in 5 or 10 or 20 years?
Well, I think philosophically over the past few decades, the majority of the country has been kind of moving towards wanting more big government power. And, we were just talking yesterday about how raising the minimum wage is a pretty popular policy. And that's because people are pretty happy with the government giving them all sorts of stuff. So when you have that sort of ideology spreading amongst everybody and everybody thinks it's a good idea, the states start to lose their power and people start to lose their faith in the states, and people just expect the federal government to do everything, and they don't expect anything of their states anymore.
That's a really good point. So you think legislators at the state level are essentially meeting the needs or the wants of their constituents who just aren't expressing any?
And they're not expressing any, and I don't think they're pressuring their state representatives as much as they're hoping that big government, federal government, does something for them.
That's a really good point. It would be really interesting to know, and actually this data is probably out there somewhere if we went looking for it, what percentage of American citizens, American voters, even know who their state legislator
Right,
is?
yeah.
Who represents them in their state district? Not not in the House, not in the U.S. House, but who's your state representative?
I bet that trend over time has decreased quite a bit.
Yeah.
So
well, and I get on here a fair amount of rant about writing letters. We should be writing letters to these people because they're so effective. We think we tweet and people care. Nobody cares when you tweet. Nobody cares when I tweet. They don't care when you tweet. You write a letter to a politician and they care. And so much more at the state level because, how many letters do these folks get? Just not all that many.
Right.
And so I have never written a letter to a politician and not gotten a response. I have often not gotten the response I wanted, but I have never not gotten a response. I always at least get an acknowledgement that they got the letter. I've tweeted all kinds of stuff and never gotten a response. So it's a totally different thing. I think, Twitter lulls us into this false sense of security that we have accomplished something by venting our spleen to the universe, and we've accomplished nothing.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's rant. That was totally for free. None of that had anything to do with what we had planned to talk about today, but it's very true, I think. Deborah, what do you think about what this looks like in 10 years?
Yeah, well, I think you kind of touched on it a little bit in that people just don't seem to really care all that much about who's representing them anymore. And I think that a lot of it is just because we don't want to rock the boat. And I think that a lot of people at the state level don't want to rock the boat either. I think that they're fine just going with the status quo as long as it keeps them out of the news in a bad way, as long as it makes them look good. And I think that that is one of the bigger issues.
That makes a lot of sense. Deborah Van Kempen, ladies and gentlemen. I just realized that I went with Van Helsing and never actually completed her name earlier in the podcast. So sorry about that.
No.
One of our newest employees, and just very glad to have you with us. So,
thank you.
Didn't want you to think that hadn't bothered to learn your name. That would be embarrassing.
That's okay.
For me. Do we see other states joining into this movement, do you think? I mean, Texas, no big surprise there, right? You'd almost expect Texas to do it just to kind of stick their thumb in Joe Biden's eye.
Yeah.
right.
Montana, very much a sort of libertarian thinking state in a lot of ways. Are there other states that you would expect to start flexing their muscles a little bit in these kinds of areas?
It's going to be happening more. I mean, I don't have any specifics off the top of my head, but we saw a lot of left-wing states push back against some Trump administration policies, and when I was doing the research for this piece, similar moves were made by right-wing states back when Obama was president. So, but I do think it could happen more than it's ever happened before now, just because the government is trying to grab more power than they were in the last two administrations.
There's certainly more need for it now.
Yeah.
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 Deborah, you're from Nevada, right?
Yes.
So what do you see Nevada kind of going this way?
I don't know. I think that unfortunately the governor of Nevada has kind of gone along with whatever Governor Newsom's thoughts are in terms of policy and things like that. But
so maybe we should just merge those two states.
That's what they would like, but I'm not of the same opinion.
Okay.
But I think that I do see a few more states in the Midwest kind of jumping up and joining the call if other states are doing this, because I feel like states that are along the far east and west coast, like the very much more liberal states, I don't really see them. I don't really see them standing up all that much to any of Biden's executive orders. But I think that a lot of people in the Midwest who don't feel like their opinions matter when it comes to policies that these big political elites are making, I think that they would be much more inclined to be fighters.
Interesting. So certainly an area where we've seen a lot of disparity over the past years, just been COVID response. We see everything from I want to say almost submissive response from, for instance, New York Governor Cuomo.
Yes.
And where, as opposed to, for instance, DeSantis in Florida, who in many ways has exemplified, I wouldn't call his response perfect, but in many ways has been what I would want it to be. And in Arizona, Doug Ducey has tried to split the baby, in my opinion. I think it's done some stuff that I think I agree with, other things not so much. has more or less, it's left a lot of it to localities to decide what they want to do, and I'm okay with that, I guess. One thing he said recently was that it was time for Arizona schools to reopen, and that is certainly not something we're seeing in every state.
No, definitely not. In fact, it's interesting because that is an issue that is kind of near and dear to my heart. Like you said, or like we talked about, I grew up in Nevada. I grew up in Las Vegas. And actually, we just did a story on this yesterday. The Clark County School District that encompasses schools in Las Vegas and in Nevada, their suicide rate among students has gone up to twice the amount that it was last year. This year, they reported that they've had 18 suicides among students, which is just an unbelievable number. And it's very sad. And it's interesting because, CDC researchers have even recently found that being at school in person does not contribute to a significantly higher amount of COVID infection or death rates.
Right.
And so it's just insane that students still aren't able to go back to school with what we know about the virus, with what we know about the age of people that it affects a lot more. It's remarkable to me that we're still at this point where schools are not open. And, you think about all of the negative effects that this has had on children, on their mental health issues, on parents who aren't able to provide adequate childcare for their students while they have to stay at home and do online virtual schooling.
Right.
And even, on the economy, it's just all of these things culminated. It really doesn't make much sense to me why schools are still closed. So I wanted to ask you, why has it taken so long for schools to realize that they need to reopen?
Well, I mean, this specifically goes to the teachers' unions and the powers that they hold over public schools. And it's not, I think there are going to be some good things coming out of this, because we've seen that parents are starting to wake up to this. They're starting to wake up to the fact that teachers' unions care about teachers, but they don't actually care about the level of education that children are getting.
Big rise in homeschooling.
And they want wage raises, they want more resources, but when it comes to increasing like test scores and performance from students, everything's remained flat for like 60 years, even though they've received roughly $10,000 more in funding in that same time, and that's adjusted for inflation. But they don't realize it because they don't care. They care. The teachers want what they want, and they're going to get it. And because we don't have school choice available to everyone in this country, they're allowed to get away with it.
Yeah.
That's a great answer. So this is also a subject near and dear to my heart. I used to teach. My wife was a career educator. I taught for a number of years, but she spent her whole life pretty much until recently in education one way or another. Yeah.
My mom's a teacher too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice. So Lisa and I actually taught at the same school for a couple of years. And I don't remember the numbers. What I do remember, I used to know the numbers. I don't anymore. I remember at the time, the school that we taught at, we spent significantly less money per student than public educators did. Significantly less. And had far better outcomes. And there are lots of different reasons for that. It's not solely an issue of money. Obviously, parental involvement is huge. And when you're at a private school, you tend to have people, they're making a decision about where they're going to spend their money. So they're consumers now. They care about quality, right? If we could fly everywhere in the country for free all the time, every airline's just kind of the same and it doesn't matter. But when you make a choice, I fly on Southwest because it's a little cheaper usually and the people are nice. And that's really simple. Schools don't have that issue to the degree that that private school is not accessible to folks because of expense, lack of vouchers, et cetera. There just isn't any competition there. Charter schools help with that. I'm not a huge fan of charter schools because they are still essentially government schools. The great folks at Hillsdale College would disagree with me, and I'm a big supporter of Hillsdale College, and they're big into charter schools, so I don't want to, ruffle their feathers too much, but I don't think that ultimately is the answer, because at the end of the day, charter schools are still run by the government. They're still regulated by the government. And the answer, as Reagan said so well, government is not the solution to the problem. It is almost never and that almost is really small. Almost never the solution to the problem. It is the problem. Teachers' unions are just a great example of how teachers give money to unions, and it's not usually the teachers. There are sometimes teachers who are the problem.
Yeah.
And I get that just because there are bad apples everywhere. So there are some, just like there's a bad cop once in a while who gives a lot of cops a bad name, right?
Yeah.
There's some bad teachers out there. Of course there are. And if you're a teacher, you know them. And if you're a teacher and you think you don't know any, it's you. Let's just make that clear. So, there's a little lesson in self-awareness. But it's mostly the unions. And the unions take money from the teachers. They give it to Democrats. Democrats then put things in place that make sure that teachers' unions stay in power so that they can get more money and give it to Democrats. And that's the cycle over and over and over again. Unfortunately, it's a cycle with pretty much every union now. And so, the reason, the very long answer to your short question, Deborah, that it takes so long for schools to make these, or school administrations to make this realization, is they have zero motivation to do it. We do what we're paid to do, what we're motivated to, and by paid, that can be money or it could be other things that we're paid in, satisfaction, whatever. But we do what we are rewarded for doing.
And, you got these teacher unions are typically in bed with Democratic politicians. And so you mix
typically is putting it lightly.
You mix.
They are both chained to the bed together. That's how that works.
You mix
not
that.
Not to stress that metaphor too badly.
So you add the power that those unions have to the narrative that COVID is this world-ending thing. And that's how you get schools not wanting to go back.
We're done with COVID now, though.
Yeah.
Because, did you see the New York Times headline this morning?
Oh, my goodness.
COVID's plummeting now that Biden is in office for a week. COVID's not going to be a problem anymore.
It doesn't even exist anymore.
Wear 2 masks anyway,
What's
but
COVID?
COVID who? Yeah. Sorry.
And it's interesting that you bring up Democratic legislatures, because I know, definitely in a lot of the overly populated states that are Democrat, like California and New York, the schools still have not opened.
Yes.
And it's absolutely insane that they haven't realized, again, what we were talking about earlier, that they haven't realized all of the negative effects that this has had on children.
And the CDC is calling for them to get back into the classroom.
Yeah.
No experts are saying, I shouldn't say no experts, because that term can be broadly applied to anybody.
Cuomo just has decided he self-identifies as an expert.
Generally, the people that the left have been following in terms of COVID guidance are telling them to get back into the classroom, get kids back in the classroom. They're not doing it. So
no, they literally. I mean, the deaths of, and I don't mean to be flip. The death of any person is a tragedy.
Yes.
The death of any child, triply so. But these deaths lay at the feet of these school administrators who in public would, I'm sure, say we follow the science, because that's the left line, right? We follow the science. And in reality, they couldn't give a flip.
They follow their own self-interest.
Yeah, exactly, which we all do. Yeah. That's what we do. We follow self-interest. Yeah. So I understand that. The problem is we've set up a system where their self-interest is bad for children. And that's because the government's in charge of it. And what does government do? It screws stuff up. It is the problem. It doesn't fix stuff.
So now that Biden is in office and COVID is over, are these schools in New York and California going to reopen?
I think it's closer to happening, but all those systems we just talked about are still in place. Yeah. So I could see it happening sooner if the Democratic narrative continues to go towards, oh my gosh, Biden has saved us from COVID. Like, if they continue to push that, which I've definitely seen some stuff this morning to suggest that's becoming more the case.
Oh, yeah. My question, and I've been thinking about this for a good chunk of today, and I don't know the answer. My question is, what do the unions want?
Yeah.
What do they want? What is it? It can't be safety, because we know safety isn't an issue. I mean, it could be safety if they're all idiots. If they all just don't know how COVID works, I guess it could be safety. And they're like, please give us safety even though they have it already. I guess that's possible. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt and assume they're not idiots. So what do they want? What are they holding out? Well, I guess what I'm used to is a union holds out essentially they're saying we're on strike, right? It's not officially a strike, but that's essentially what they're doing. When you strike, it's because it's a negotiating position. You're bargaining for something. What is it they're bargaining for? What is it they want they don't already have that would allow them to send their people to work? I don't know the answer to that question.
I mean, looking at it myself, I think it's, for a lot of those unions, I think it's a power grab. It's asserting their power. It's showing, look, if they can truly get away with this and like not see any ramifications for it, you know, there's a lot more than they can get away with going forward in terms of getting teachers in public schools, all these different things that they don't necessarily need, but make their lives much more cushy and comfortable.
Sure.
So,
well, I think one effect that they've had, and more people need to be stepping up and saying this, I think, is that teachers' unions are demonstrating, they're screaming from the mountaintops, teachers are not essential workers. They're screaming it.
Yeah.
You don't need us. Yeah. Your kids don't need us. We may as well not come to work. Right. And I think long term that could wind up being a bad marketing position for them to have asserted. But yeah, you mentioned California and New York specifically. If I were a betting man, I am a betting man. I would say those would be the two probably last that I would expect to open last. Probably California first, because Newsom, I think, is starting to feel heat from this recall effort. And then
poor Gavin.
Yeah, I know. I feel so bad for him. And then Andrew Cuomo, because Andrew Cuomo doesn't seem to be interested in science at all.
And we saw that towards the beginning of the pandemic.
Yes, we did.
In March, the state ordered nursing homes to take back patients that had COVID, and that led to this huge surge of deaths in New York, as anyone could have guessed it would have, except for maybe Andrew Cuomo or the other Democrats in New York. And, you know, another troubling part about this for me is that, you know, out of all the COVID deaths, this report from the AARP back in December basically found that 39% of all COVID deaths happen in nursing homes. Now, that takes into account nursing home workers as well as patients, but still, obviously, the majority of that is patients.
Right. Sure.
And that added to the fact that Cuomo put so many back in nursing homes is just, it's incredibly troubling. And add that to the fact that the New York Times is now reporting that New York State Attorney Letitia James is saying that they may have undercounted their nursing home COVID deaths by as much as 50%.
My goodness.
And this is not somebody with an interest in going after Andrew Cuomo.
This is the New York Times.
No.
Yeah, this is the New York Times. This is somebody who absolutely supports.
Yeah, both James and Cuomo are Democrats. It was already an earth-shatteringly shocking story that all those people had died, and now it's being suggested that it could be twice as many. And which leads to, I mean, depending on how the numbers work, I don't want to get too, you know, I'm not in the weeds on this, but I mean, what they're essentially saying is that maybe 80% in New York State, maybe 80% of COVID deaths were in nursing homes following that order. And that falls, I mean, both New York State separated from the numbers that New York City brings is one of the worst states in terms of COVID death percentage. And then New York City, if compared to all the states, is also up there right next to it.
I mean, it's just, again, it's tragic. I don't want to be flip. I mean, we're talking about people's lives, and unfortunately, we're talking about people who in many cases died alone, apart from family members, not able to have their hands held, etc., and which just makes it all the worse. Has anybody, I'd love to see Andrew Cuomo get on TV and say, sorry, I mean, I don't know how you'd say, my bad is not going to cover it, but, I don't even know how you'd say it, but I'd love to hear somebody just step up and take some responsibility.
Well, we've known that he's done such a bad job this whole time, but the Democratic narrative, the establishment media narrative has been that he's kind of been one of the shining heroes.
Oh yeah, no, it's
of
all
this
Trump's fault.
Pandemic.
Yeah, Trump
He believes he's a
killed all
hero.
these people.
Yeah.
He doesn't think he
Right,
did anything
didn't he have
wrong.
that book coming out
Yes.
that's like how I
How I handled the COVID-19 pandemic.
That should be an interesting read.
Thank you, Andrew.
That I feel like that book is just going to be one fact check after another.
Yeah.
It's just like
should be right next to O.J. Simpson's "I Did It" on the bookshelf.
if I did it. Yeah,
if I did it.
If I
right.
did it.
Right.
Yeah. So OJ, of course, yeah.
Well, he's got the Emmy. He's
hypothetical.
got the book.
Yeah.
He's got the pay raise.
Right.
How does he? How are people giving him all of these things?
Well, that's kind of what I've been wondering from this, and I wanted to get what you guys think on this. Is how I have a sneaking suspicion that this is not going to hurt him any more than it did when we first learned that he sent nursing home patients back. So how do you think they're able to pull this over with everybody? I know the establishment media has a lot of pull, but we've seen
even
from
the New York Times is saying, "Hey, this is worse than they've been telling us."
Yeah, I mean, it seems like I think he's still going to get painted as a hero at the end of the day, and I'm wondering how you think that they've been able to pull off this narrative despite all these facts coming out about him handling this so poorly.
Well, he's got a great connection at CNN.
That's
I'll tell you that.
True. Very true. I think one of the things that the mainstream media would need to have to turn on Cuomo is a viable alternative. If you had somebody like Bill, they don't really seem to like Bill de Blasio all that much at the moment either. But if you had somebody like that, or AOC says, "I'm going to run for governor of New York,"
right.
Okay, now you might see some mainstream media outlets in New York say, "Oh, wait a minute. Well, that's a viable alternative. We kind of like
Right.
AOC. Maybe it's safe."
Diversity in action.
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, I've already gone on enough rants today, Deborah.
Sorry.
But what they are not going to do is take shots at him in lieu of knowing who his competition is.
Right.
They're certainly not going to set up a Cuomo failure until the possibility of a Republican challenger is off the table. So if they had as long as the risk is Cuomo versus some unnamed Republican,
Right.
they're always going to go Cuomo. Always.
Yeah.
Somebody else sets up to come after that power from the left.
Yeah.
I could maybe see the New York Times changing their editorial policy at that point. But I think we'll just have to wait and see if that even happens.
Yeah, got to keep the evil Republicans out of power because they're not going to make you wear like 10 masks all at the same time.
Yeah. Somebody on Twitter that I follow who works for the Daily Caller, I won't use her name, but she said yesterday something like, if you're not wearing 7 masks, you can't be my friend.
Yeah.
And immediately got a response under it that said, I bid 8. Very, very first response. I mean, it just is ridiculous. And again, the Times this morning. So the Times is saying, hey, everything's dropping. COVID rates are dropping like 35%. Or I forget the number, but it was some significant number. And, it's rainbows and puppies and unicorns and everything's wonderful. And Joe Biden's ending racism now, according to CBS.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
They did say that.
They did. They did. Now it'll end. I'm like, yeah, Obama didn't do it, but Biden, it's done. Now that we got an old white guy
The
as
old white
president,
guy has done
as
it.
long as he's a Democrat, he can end racism. Anyway, whatever. But in that same news brief that I get from New York Times every day, we've got rainbows and puppies on COVID. And by the way, you should wear 2 masks. I'm like,
What?
How are both those things true?
Right.
Because we're not wearing 2 masks now. It's not like, if a month ago they'd been saying wear 2 masks and everyone was like, yeah, 2 masks.
Yeah.
And we all did it. And then we saw a 35% drop. I'd go, oh, maybe there's something to the 2 mask thing.
Right.
No, but we have the drop now. So why would we change? Clearly, whatever is happening is working. So why would we change that? Because it's the New York Times, and we all have to do exactly what they tell us to do.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Well, that's pretty much all I had for that.
That's all Michael has
yeah.
for that. All right. And I've ranted enough for one day, I think. So I appreciate you staying with me. I couldn't even say Deborah's name. She did not leave the podcast, which is always a good sign. But we're glad that you joined us today. I appreciate both you guys being here for this good conversation. We are here every day, 5% Eastern.
Only at 5%.
Yeah.
And then
we'll check
100% at 5:10 Eastern. We just need a little time to wake up. 5 p.m. Eastern. I'm never going to get these times right. 2 p.m. Pacific. We're here Monday through Friday with WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. Luckily, we sound a little bit more intelligent when we talk about the issues than when we actually try to promote the podcast. A little bit. But it's important that you support us. We need your support. We can't keep doing what we're doing without your support. In fact, we wouldn't want to. So we talked about liking and subscribing to us. Subscribe to us. Find us on youtube.com/WJ Live. Click that subscribe button. Click that bell and follow us there. If you're more of an audio podcast person, listen to us on your commute or when you're doing the dishes or, whatever it is that you do during the day. Hey, there's an idea. Listen to us on your commute. I wish I'd thought of that. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, Google, iHeart, wherever you find your podcasts, we're pretty much there. The other way that you can subscribe us that's really near and dear to my heart is that you can subscribe to the Western Journal itself. It's westernjournal.com/join. We have multiple subscription options there for you. It's a few dollars a month. It's not a lot of money. And you directly support paying people like this who to do this work, to do this research, to come out with articles, with videos, with material for you to equip you with the truth so that you know what's going on. I do not have to tell you that big tech wants to censor conservative news in every way they can. And in fact, they don't just want to do it. They're doing it. I don't have to tell you that. I don't have to tell you that big government feels very much the same way. You can support us directly so that we can hold these people accountable for actions that are bad for you, bad for the country, bad for the future of your families, your children, your grandchildren. It is why we're here. It's what we want to do. So you can support us directly. Again, it's westernjournal.com/join and subscribe to us there. Thank you for joining us here on WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal today. Next time I will try to get all the words right. I'll try. And we'll see how that goes. But you won't want to miss that. It's because, it's fun to watch people mess stuff up. And I pretty much promise you I'm going to do that. So we'll see you next time again, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific on WJ Live. See you then. Stay safe.
Josh, did you hear? They're putting the Libertarian back on the podcast.
No.
Oh? You didn't see the calendar?
No.
You should talk to Kayla about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, who's on the show Tuesday?
You and Joe.
Yeah. Like he's back.
Yeah, no. You and Joe.
The Libertarian?
Yeah, Libertarian Joe.
He's not back.
You should just go in the studio and check it out.
You're messing with me.
Okay.
Okay. Nice joke, Kayla. Come here to go to the studio.
Oh.
No!